Black joy. What is it? And does it seem like we're talking about this concept more now than ever? Well, if you're feeling that way, you are right. The concept of Black joy has garnered more attention in recent years, and that's in part because the version of Black history taught today focuses largely on our pain and our struggles. Images of Black people experiencing violence and inequity are common in today's media, but these images are only a part of the Black experience. Today, we are acknowledging the other part. We are celebrating the beauty and the boldness of Black joy. My first guest has written a book entitled Black Joy, and later in the show, I go one-on-one with hip-hop violinist Big Lux. All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
My first guest today is Tracy Lewis Jickets. She is an entrepreneur, the host of the podcast Heart Talk with Tracy Michelle. She's an educator who explores the intersectionality of culture, faith, and spirituality. She's also the author of multiple books. Her latest is Black Joy, Stories of Resistance, Resilience, and Restoration. Welcome to the show, Tracy, and thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, I'm super excited to sit down with you. You've written this incredible book called Black Joy, but it didn't start as a book. It started as an essay in the Washington Post. So tell us, what prompted you to even write that op-ed piece in the Post?
Well, I was actually part of this workshop where we were pitching stories, and I had been thinking about what Black joy meant in the moment. This is summer 2020, right? And so there's lots of racial unrest. Folks are hitting the streets. And I was thinking about what that meant for me as a parent, as a mother, what I was demonstrating to my child, what I was demonstrating to my neighborhood, and just came up with this concept and pitched it to the Post, and they bid. And so that was the beginning. I had been thinking about joy, though, for Black joy in particular for a very long time. So it was just all of the kind of the things that worked up to that moment.
So tell us, what were you thinking? You're right. The summer of 2020 was so much going on. From the murder of George Floyd, us witnessing it on that videotape that we saw, played over and over again in our households, to us watching worldwide protests erupt. And for many people feeling like this was something different. We were in this moment that in many ways felt very different. But you mentioned that you're a parent. I'm a parent too, so I'm always curious to know how parents were processing that and what were they saying to their children?
Yes. Well, what was interesting about what was going on is that I connected very deeply to it all because I had a family member that was a victim of racial violence in 2018. And so what I had experienced was, of course, the grieving process, but also having my daughter watch me grieve this family member and all that comes with that, the rage, the sorrow, of course, all of that. And then also being a writer that's writing about race and racial reconciliation and trying to make sense of it all on the page as well as in my life. And so I think what I had begun to see was that my daughter was getting all of the trauma-related pieces of it, but she wasn't necessarily seeing the process that I was working out in therapy, right? Like what I was identifying as joy and accessing as joy. And so I had to sort of rewind a little bit and as a parent help her understand the realities of the world that we lived in and what she will experience as a little brown girl in this world. And then also how Black folks time after time after time have been resilient, have used Black joy and wielded it as a form of resistance. And also how we've used it to heal, right? So I needed her to see that in me, right? And then also as I began writing out, all of the other stuff just start coming out, all our research, all of that just came together.
So this whole concept, Tracy, of Black joy, not a new concept. I remember around 2015 or so, this New York City writer and educator, began this project of sharing these images on social media saying, look, we're only getting half of the story because so much of the history that's taught to African Americans is our history of trauma, our history of pain, our history of inequities. And although that is so incredibly important that we share those messages and, share a correct history, folks like you and others believe that the other half of the story needs more focus. So what is for you that other half of the story?
I think yes to all of what you just said, because I think the other half of that story is really the ways in which we have, I don't know if it's intuitively, I don't know if it's a function of circumstance and our, historical situation, we have used a very strategically. And there's a reason why all of the major genres of music that we know here in America is rooted in the African American culture, right? We were able to somehow reinvent and recreate our circumstances at every single turn. And then whenever it's commodified or colonized or whatever language you want to use around it, we're still able to flip it and use it. And I think that is something that we also celebrate. So when we're celebrating Black history and the work that we've done and the struggle and even the trauma that we've come through, it is equally important that we also celebrate the ways in which we have been able to express our joy, use it to heal. The way that joy is an embodied emotion, right? And so if you think about what joy feels like in the body, Grandmama rocking at church is moving that trauma of the week, right? Through her body, talking back to the preacher, like all of that, the dancing, the music, the movement, the embodiment of joy, right? And again, that's only one way that it shows up for us. And that's what I tried to explore in the book was like, we're not a monolithic people, so there are a myriad of ways that joy has showed up for us.
Yeah, I'm sitting here in the Office of Special Needs Network and a nonprofit that sponsors this show, and also nonprofit I had the privilege of starting some 15 years ago to really acknowledge, help, assist families, Black families primarily, whose children have autism and other developmental disabilities. And I'm thinking about the children. I'm thinking about all the joy that parents who have been a part of this organization experience, when they get help for their kids, when they get, a new program or a new service. And even though for some, they may think of a diagnosis of autism or other disability as a horrible thing, a tragedy. Right. But even in the midst of that, families can find joy. And I think when you talk about the Black experience, that's what it is, right? It's taking those things that are traditionally painful or what may be thought to be painful, and then finding ways to celebrate, the beauty even in our pain. So I'm so glad that you, in the midst of all the pain we've been experiencing over the last 18 months or so, found the words and the mechanism through which to share this. I want to go back to that article for a minute, though, that Washington Post article that's got all of this started. What was the response? What were you hearing from people when they read that article?
Well, they were really in two categories, right? The response was overwhelmingly positive. I think from a lot of Black folks who were reading this piece, they identified with me being in the backyard and dancing with my daughter and feeling that freedom and the liberation in that, but also being acutely aware of the Trump supporter down the street and the people that are watching us dance in this yard, right? And, the feelings that come out of that when I am both aware of that, but also in the moment with my child. Of course, there were people who didn't understand, how joy can have a color, right? And so that's part of what I do in the book also is like in the introduction is like, does joy have a color? And I distinctly say that it does. And here is why, right? Because it's rooted in our experience is very distinct as Black people in this country, in this world. And so what we've had to do to attain this or to retain or reclaim a joy that's just natural special for everyone is very different from every other group. And so it's important for us to acknowledge that. But yeah, those were pretty much the two responses, with the overwhelmingly being positive and yes, I see it, I get it.
It's interesting that you say that. So there were folks who read the article who pushed back or challenged or questioned somehow this notion that there is something called Black joy.
Yes. So like I said, I got a rush of all of these positive responses, and then this trickle. It was just a trickle. So I want to be clear about that. Of folks who just did not understand why, we once again have to put a color or a race on a thing. And as we talk about when we talk about Black love and Black Lives Matter, there is some very distinct experiences that we have that's unique to us that we get to, and we have the right to celebrate, acknowledge, explore, dig into all of those things.
Right. No, and you're right. We are often having to explain to people the uniqueness of Blackness. So I'm glad that you got those responses, because that gave you yet another opportunity to do what we have to do on the regular, which is continue to remind folks of our ancestors, our history. So go from that article, Tracy, to now this incredible book that has gotten so much positive praise, acclaim from book reviewers, celebrities, and other folks who are in your lane, kind of that spiritual culture intersectionality lane. How did you get the idea that this article resonated with folks? Maybe I should make this bigger and make this into a book.
Well, I had been thinking and writing about the topic. I think the inclination that this was something bigger than just the essay was I was in therapy, and my therapist was helping me kind of, what does joy feel like in your body, and and all of these ideas, all these things that I had observed over the course of my 40 plus years started to come. I'm like, oh, so this is bigger than this one experience, right? Like this is something that Black folks have been doing a long time. From there, after the Washington Post essay hit, this was a season where people were looking for Black voices. And so very quickly after that, I got an agent, I got, all of the things, right? A publishing deal. But then that began the real work, right? Of like, how do I talk about my personal experience and intersect that with the collective? If we're not a monolithic people, then Black joy is not going to look the same. Right. So how do I tell my story, but then also tell our story? And so that began the work, and I started writing and all the things that come with that process.
So you do share, Tracy, some very personal stories about your own lived experiences. What was that? I've heard you mention therapy. So I imagine that you're talking about these very personal experiences in your therapy sessions, which are, confidential and very private. But to go from that, where you're, in an office sharing or maybe on Zoom with a therapist, to now putting it in a book where the world can pick up and read about some of, the really difficult experiences that you have had. What was that process like?
So challenging. I am the type of writer that is pretty transparent anyway. Mm-hmm. But when I started doing and unpacking and uncovering my own story, it was extremely challenging. And there were times when I'd read something to my husband and he's like, you sure? You sure you want to say that? Or I definitely sent the book to my mom and said, hey, there's some things you're going to read here that you don't know, and so it was challenging, but I felt also a sense of gratitude, I guess, the sense that, it was for a larger purpose, that I wasn't just out here oversharing, as one sometimes does in the age of social media, right? I was sharing with the hopes that someone else could say, oh, so that's how I can use joy, or that's what that was when I went through that thing and I came out of it. That's what it looked like. Or when grandmama did that, oh, that's why she told me that. I was hoping that it wasn't for naught, right? Like that I'm not just telling my story just to be telling it, but that someone is getting something, that there is healing that's happening on the other side of that page, or at least the beginning or the pursuit of healing. So it was hard though.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm thinking about an interview I did of a doctor who wrote a book, and she had to share domestic violence that happened in her household with her father. And the father, was very prominent, and she's a prominent physician. So he wasn't, too kind about her. I mean, he wasn't too keen, I should say, on her sharing, the details of this domestic violence that she experienced or witnessed as a child growing up in her household. So I'm curious about, the response from your mom, your husband, and even your daughter, because you're now sharing things that you said your mom didn't know. Were there moments where they said, look, that may be what you experienced, but we experienced it too, and we don't want our business in your book?
Right.
Did you get any of that?
I didn't, because I was very careful to make sure that I was writing from my POV, from my point of view. So it is my experience. This is, and I actually say this in the acknowledgement, this is how I experienced this thing, right? And, so I went from that side of things where I am, saying, hey, I want to be careful. I want to, treat these experiences as sacred, know that other people have different points of view about them, all the way to the other spectrum, which is, to quote Anne Lamott, if people didn't want me to write about it, they would have been nicer to me. I went back and forth between that. So, but I think, for the most part, I was in the perspective of, I want people, to not try to get hung up on names and, what happened and who, and more about how I was processing this experience, whether it was childhood, abuse or, a verbal abuse in a relationship or things on the job. I'm sure that people recognize themselves in this story, and that's got to be okay because it's mine to tell, right? So
what was the most difficult story or experience that you shared that brought up the most emotions for you, or maybe was the most difficult for you to say to your daughter or your husband, look, I'm going to share this in the book?
So, my first thought is to talk about sexual assault and sexual abuse as being the hardest thing. But I think, honestly, I've talked so much about that. I was a part of Brene Brown, Tarana Burke's book, You Are Your Best Thing. And I have explored that greatly in my works. I don't know if that was the hardest thing. I think the hardest thing was...
Let me stop you right there, Tracy. Did your daughter know about the sexual assault before you shared it in Tarana Burke's book?
She did not, and she still does not. Unless she watches this video. Unless she watches this. She's 10. So, we are very careful about what she reads and what she takes in terms of content. We have very candid conversations, though, about good touch and bad touch and, our bodies. And she's getting into the tween age, which has me kind of like, because, she's asking a lot of questions about her body and I'm answering those questions, but she does not know a lot about my personal history. And so there will come a time, I think, where she asks to read Black Joy all the time. And I tell her not yet. It's for adults for right now, but we would have that conversation.
And I'm sure if she's your daughter, she could probably read it at 10 and understand every word. So I have no doubt that she would, but you're right. The content, is too advanced for a 10-year-old.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you're saying that wasn't necessarily the most difficult story because you'd already shared that and processed that. Was there another story other than the sexual assault?
Yeah, I think beyond that, I think one of the hardest things was unpacking my grief, and not just around my elder cousin who was killed in 2018, but I have a piece that I really do love called I Have Dreams to Remember Granny. And it's about my grandmother and all the things that I wish she'd said and all the things that I'd wished I said. But then all the ways that I, in hindsight, recognize that she was protective of me and demonstrating joy in the capacity that she had to we may say, oh, she was this type of person or that type of person, but she showed us who she was and how much love and joy she had in very specific ways. And I think that just took me to a place, because she's gone and I can't tell her, she's my ancestor, so hopefully she sees it and feels it and knows it. But that I think I also did another piece about my first love in high school, and that was very hard because I don't think I had never made the connection to my adult life and the choices that I made in relationships later to that very first love, right? And what it taught me. So I think those ironically were the maybe less traumatic in the classical definitions, but the hardest to write about.
What do you want the takeaway, Tracy, to be from the book? Obviously this is a book that I think of the people who may be going through something, who may be experiencing some difficult time themselves, who may be, experiencing racial battle fatigue from just watching all of the traumatic events that have happened over the last 18 months. But what do you want someone who picks this book up to take away?
Sure. No matter who you are, whether you're a mom in Texas, whether you're an activist hitting those streets, whether you're a celebrity, whether you're a lawyer, no matter who you are, as a Black person in this world, you are enough, you have value, and your joy matters just as much as your trauma and your struggle. Mm-hmm. And I hope that when people read this, that they are able to look at my life, look at my experiences, on the job with the microaggressions, protesting, whatever it is, and be able to then turn around and look at their own life and identify where joy shows up in their bodies, in their lives, in their experiences, and then turn around and when things get tough again, be able to access it when they need it. Because I think that's the power. It's like we hear all the time now, Black joy is resistance. Black joy is resistance. And it absolutely is. And I talk about that. But even more than resistance, it's the mechanism for resilience. It is how we restore ourselves. That's how we're able to get up again and protest, get up again and go to work, get up again and take care of our kids. And so that, I think, is ultimately what I hope is that we can heal and restore ourselves through joy.
Well said, Tracy. I mean, I think that's so powerful when we think about it. It's that which allows us to keep getting back up, even after being knocked down so many times. And sometimes people counting us out, believing that we won't recover or rebound, but yet finding somehow that inner strength to keep moving forward. What's next for you? I know you are a content creator, you're an educator, you're a writer, 15 books. It's number 16. I'm sorry.
18.
18. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Yes. My goodness. Almost 20. What's next? More books, more content. What can we expect to see from Tracy?
I have lots of books in me. So I will be writing for the foreseeable future. Speaking those kinds of things on this topic. I do have another book that's coming out in the fall called Then They Came for Mine, Healing from the Trauma of Racial Violence. So I really start to dig into, some of the grief work that I've been doing and that I hope that we can do as a people. So that's coming coming out in the fall. Don't have a date yet. And I'm looking, thank you. I'm looking to get into, TV and film and just telling stories. It's what I do. I tell stories, whether they're mine, somebody else's. I'm a collaborator, ghostwriter. So I've worked with some high profile folks on their projects. So whether I'm telling my story or theirs, or some fictional piece of my imagination, I want to continue to tell stories that are for us, but that anybody can really kind of grab onto and get something from. So that's the goal, and that's what I hope I continue to do.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, congratulations again on the upcoming book. Are you writing like a book a year? Seems like you're just turning them out, which is great, which is phenomenal. As you said, there's this moment, this thing is happening where Black voices are being heard, breaking through in some major publishing houses in ways that we had not been able to just even, several years ago. So many authors, I've had the privilege of interviewing authors like yourself, many, well, not like yourself, because they hadn't all written 18 books. So let me just be clear. So some who had just written their... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a good portion of that was in the independent realm, right? Like I've been at this for 20 years. And so it's only within these last 2 or 3 years, again, Black folks are in vogue and, we are, and we're doing what we've always been doing. So nothing has changed on that end, but we're just starting to be seen, I guess, differently in light of what's been brought to the forefront. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of the independent work was just seed planting, and maybe it's time for my harvest. I don't know.
But, I'm glad you brought that up because that's so important. And a lot of people forget that folks like yourself, you've been out there 20 years. You didn't just, wake up one day and get a big publishing deal with a publishing, a mainstream publishing house. So I like to encourage folks who say they have a book in them, who want to write, who worry that they may not get a literary agent, that they may not get a big publishing deal, that they shouldn't be thinking or worrying about that. They should just be writing. They should just be telling those stories because you did that. And now, 20 years later, here you are. I was blessed to be the ambassador for the Leimert Park Book Fair. It's a big African-American book fair here in Los Angeles. And I told the organizers, it was such a full circle experience because my first self-published book, when we were outside, no COVID, all the self-publishers were in the back. They had a tent for us. We were all there together. They had a big stage with, all the big best-selling, big publisher, type authors. No one visited us, at our little self-publishing tent. We were just, kind of the kids in the back row that no one paid much attention to. And so full circle, I just finished my fourth book and I was, selected to be the ambassador for this book fair and now on the main stage. So I said, that's I hope the takeaway that people get is I wrote that book independently, self-published it, got into a book fair, in the back of the room, and now Full Circle, was actually the spokesperson, ambassador, keynote speaker for that book fair. So it can happen. You just got to tell those stories, and who knows when you're going to get that opportunity. So your story is such inspiration.
I love that so much because I was there. I did those book fairs in the back. I did the, selling my books in the salon. And I'm tearing up hearing you tell your story because it's 2022 and my very first tiny poetry collection that I published was in 2002. So I am exactly at 20 years. And so to have this moment with Black Joy, where all of these endorsements and all of this stuff is coming through, at the 20-year mark after putting in that work, and like you said, being at the festivals and going to speak in the small, venues or whatever, it is a sense of gratitude and to, and an example, I guess, as you said, to people that keep doing the work you're called to do because it will pay off.
Yeah, no, and we could trade stories, I'm sure, all day. I mean, being at a book signing, it's like 3 people there and 2 of them are related to you.
Yes, absolutely. Been there, and you're lucky if you got 3.
takes a lot of that Black joy that we're talking about to keep going, right? To keep getting up, keep telling those stories, not get discouraged.
Yes.
So no, I'm just delighted that you wrote this book. So I want all my aspiring authors out there to look at Tracy, look at her example, use it. Keep telling those stories. And it may be 5 years later or 10 years later, 20, maybe 50 years later. It doesn't matter. We're going to all live to be over 100 anyhow. Just keep telling those stories. Don't give up on yourself because we're not giving up on you as a community. Thank you so much, Tracy. Your inspiration is everything. And make sure everyone go out and pick up Black Joy. If you're trying to do anything in the new year, it's new year, new you. You need this book to achieve that new you in this new year. Keep blessing us with those stories. We'll keep following you because we know some other amazing things are going to happen for you. And when they happen for you, they're happening for our community, which is what makes me so happy. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much for the work you do. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. Talk soon, my friend. My next guest is Big Lux. He is a hip hop violinist, a West Point graduate, and Army veteran who earned a Bronze Star Medal for his service in Iraq. And his new album is out. It's called Generations. Good morning and welcome to the show, Big Lux.
Hey, how are you doing, Areva? Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, I'm super excited. So, you got like this incredible background. We got to talk about it because you don't often find musicians who have MBAs, who have served in the military, who won medals for their service in the military, and then who write and perform hip hop using a violin. So take us back to childhood. We're not going to spend 2 hours talking about your background, but I do want to know what got you started in music.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really fortunate. I think I had it in my blood from conception. My parents, they're both from Newark, New Jersey. They met at an arts high school in Newark. It's one of the top high schools in the city. It was called Arts High because they were both artists. My dad was a musician. My mom was a singer and a painter. And so, with that start, they knew that they wanted to get me into music early and just really fortunate that my dad saw his sister, so my aunt, that played violin, and he saw some kids playing Suzuki method really early in their life. So he saw some really young kids and said, if he ever plays violin, we're going to do some Suzuki, and he's going to learn how to play from a really young age. And I guess I wanted to play from 7 or 8 years old, and so he hooked me up. We had took private lessons, and I was off to the races.
Wow. Most parents thinking like, the piano, every little kid goes to piano lessons. So were you the only little Black kid playing the violin in your community?
Yeah, I mean, yes, short answer. And I mean, my community, so I grew up in Westerly, Rhode Island, small seaside community, really predominantly white, and Italian heritage. And yeah, I mean, honestly, playing the violin period was pretty rare in that area. So there wasn't an orchestra or anything. I had to drive, every Saturday morning up to Providence and go somewhere else. We didn't have it in the school. So I quickly learned how to go to band. I learned how to play saxophone, learned how to play some of the other instruments so I could play with the other kids.
Okay, so you could be more normal. You had to learn some of those other more mundane instruments. Okay, I feel you. Okay, so I got the music, mom and dad, musicians, meet, get married, fall in love, have this kid, and say, of course we got to teach him music. It's our passion. But how the military piece? How do you end up in the Army and then doing, these tours of duty?
Yeah, I mean, so it's my dad is actually is a government employee, works for the Navy, and so like I had grown up being on submarine bases and seeing these submarines, and honestly, like reading, it was the 90s, so I was like reading too much Tom Clancy, and he was saving the world from the Soviet Union like every other day, and I was like Jack Ryan was in there, and I was like, and all these it was like Annapolis graduates and West Point graduates, and I was like, oh, I need a piece of this action, like this is what I'm gonna do. And honestly, every musician that I knew at the time was just poor. Like every single, I didn't know any working musicians who were really making it. Like it just wasn't a part of my ecosystem. So I was like, I want to get out of Westerly. I want to get out of Rhode Island. I want to see some things. I also had like a little bit of a chip on my shoulder because, you know, a lot of the rest of my family was still in Newark, New Jersey, and here I am in Westerly, Rhode Island, and I'm getting a lot of these opportunities. And we had a great music program in the school, and I was like, man, I really want to do something difficult to let people know that it's not just because I was here and I grew up here in these circumstances that made me. So there was a lot of reasons I think that conspired to bring me to West Point.
So you want a little hood life, sounds like to me, Big Lux. You don't want the Cushing, the suburban small town life of Rhode Island to be your story or your narrative. Okay.
I mean, it's not that I need a hood life. I don't want to say that, because I mean, like, you know, if you can, if you can get out of the trap.
You said you wanted to get to Newark where your folks were in Newark. So, and this isn't a knock on Newark. Newark is a great place, you know, lovely, wonderful city, but very different, I can imagine, than your small town in Rhode Island.
Right. And hey, like, you know, if you want people to get out the trap, say like, yo, get out the trap. But that wasn't going to be my struggle. I knew that wasn't going to be my struggle. But like, you know, I just wanted to do something else. And so just to show that I was capable of it. So
how long were you in the military?
So I was active duty. So I went to West Point for 4 years, and then after I graduated, I became a second lieutenant in the Engineer Corps, and I was active duty for 13 years after that.
Wow! And you actually saw combat during those years, correct?
Yeah, I was in Baghdad in 2006 and 2007, and I was in Afghanistan in 2016.
Wow. And were you able to play during the period when you were in the military? Were you still pursuing your craft as a musician?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that I think really set me apart. It was one of those things that set me apart from other officers because I had this ability to kind of bring people together. Number one, through it, and number two, like it was my stress reliever. Like honestly, I have 2 violins that are both combat veterans. I brought one to Iraq with me, and I brought an electric violin to Afghanistan. In Iraq, I didn't really have that much of I was in a combat role. I was a combat platoon leader. We were doing patrols. We were in gunfights. We were doing that thing. So there wasn't really that much time for music. But like in Afghanistan, by the time I got there in 2016, you know, we weren't really patrolling that. We were doing mostly training for the Afghans and intelligence gathering and things like that. So, you know, I would be on Bagram Airfield, and we would have like open mic nights, and we had a talent show. I won the Bagram Airfield's Got Talent show out there, and I was just like, all right. So that's a great video. I love to show people me in uniform, looking all clean and everything.
I've never so you got out the military and you just said, wait a minute, I'm just going for it. Hair, everything that they wouldn't allow you to do, you're now doing. You're living your best life, huh?
Oh, man. I mean, so I still had, yes, I am living my best life right now, but part of this is pandemic related, so like we can't get it twisted. But I did go to business school immediately after I got out of active duty, and in business school, you know, it's not really the military, but you know, in that world, you still got to kind of like, you know, keep it 100 for all the clients and stuff like that.
Yeah, I read that you went and got an MBA. So here you are, West Point graduate, combat duty, you know, bronze medal winner. Why the MBA?
It's one of those things that I think they tell us as a part of our training as a potential path that after you're an officer, they're looking for people who have, you know, so I commanded a company. I was stationed in Korea for like 4 years. I commanded a company out there of like 170 people. I was a platoon leader in combat, you know, leading 30 people. And so, and West Point is, you know, a preeminent leadership institution. And so we have these management skills, and we know that the private sector is looking for people who are organized and who are self-motivated and communicate and can work under pressure. And so a lot of us end up going into the business world, get the MBAs, either go the consultant route or go into finance or go into logistics and things like that. And so it was a well-trod path. And I did it University of Miami. It was actually interesting. We were talking, I know your last conversation about Black Joy was fantastic, and I loved listening to it. And it kind of made me reflect a little bit about my decision to go to University of Miami versus some of the other choices. I think Northeastern and Boston was one of my other places I got into. And it kind of came down to, like, when I was up there, I was like, I don't really see room for joy here. I mean, maybe it might lead to a better job, but, like, you know what, out in Miami, the student body was way more diverse. They had all these Venezuelans, they had Cubans, they had more black people, we had Africans. Like, I knew I was going to learn a ton more from my classmates, and it was going to be an amazing experience, and there was going to be room for my experience there. And so that was one of the reasons why I did it. And
now you're using that MBA, that military training, that leadership training, because you're actually working in commercial real estate, correct?
So I was working in commercial real estate while I was down in Miami. I got a job at a great project management firm, and we were doing nonprofits. I was working on building a museum, as well as some commercial real estate. We were building a Target on South Beach. And but then I just kind of got burnt out from dealing with the billionaire real estate clients and other kids that they would just like farm out stuff to that just like didn't know the industry yet. And you'd be like, oh man, I've been in combat twice. I've been working for 13 years, and like I'm taking instruction from this like 22-year-old who does not know like the toe
spoon in their mouth, but they're running the show because dad is running the show. Okay, very vivid picture. I got the picture. Very vivid picture. So you left Miami. You're back in Rhode Island now, right?
Yeah. And I'm back in Rhode Island, and I'm still able to use some of that commercial real estate experience. I'm on a planning board in the town of Westerly, so I'm helping improve development there. But the primary reason I came back was to, really get my music career started, because it's where most of my friends, my family, my base, I already knew I could get shows there. And, I knew I could move back in with mom and dad for a little while, save a little bit of money while I was a starving artist, and see if I could really make it work.
Well, I'm so glad you did that. Real estate will always be there. You could always get a job. You got an MBA. You went to West Point. You're quite employable. But your music is such a gift. It's such. When I think about a violinist, and now the hip hop part of your music, how did you merge the two, and how did you land on hip hop versus when you think of violin players, you think of classical, musicians. You don't, traditionally think of hip hop artists.
Yeah, I mean, like, it was just by paying attention to what was happening in the world around me. There were a couple of really early hip hop string groups that really blazed the trail. I'm thinking about like Nothing But Strings. I think they were on America's Got Talent, like first or second season, and they're brothers who went to Juilliard and were absolutely amazing performers, and really showed kind of the world that it could be done. Guys like Black Violin, who out of Fort Lauderdale, who are two of my idols, and just the beauty of growing up at the times we are, and kind of around where YouTube started to get bigger and bigger, and I started to see a lot of street musicians. Honestly, like a lot of what was happening with hip hop violin was happening with street musicians, and they were putting that stuff on YouTube, and we were all just kind of like consuming it and watching it and realizing that we were all going to be at the forefront of this kind of like new art form. And I was like, oh man, I got the skills to do this because I know how to improvise, because I learned when I started to play saxophone with school, and so I already knew that. I already knew I loved hip hop. I was like, oh man, this is perfect. This is the perfect combination for me. Let's get it.
So it's not just saxophone and violin. You also sing and you rap. Now, is that from mom? Because we know mom was a singer. Did she, give you your vocal chops?
Yeah. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that's where the vocal chops came from. But for me, I'm also not a natural singer. I've been working. I probably started out a little bit more like Kanye, like when he was like super rough, and I've been working my way into it.
But what about the rapping? Like, when did you add that to your repertoire?
That's a good question. I would say, when I was stationed in Germany, actually, it's funny. The guy who's my manager now, my booking agent, my PR agent, he was Tom. He was out there stationed in Germany with me. We went to high school together. We weren't in the same unit, but we were out there at the same time. And I just remember we would just have these nights where we would just go out in Frankfurt, Germany, and we would just be freestyling in the streets and just like, I don't know, we just had a lot of fun with it. And he had a lot of guys in his unit who were really skillful and stuff, and so we would go and we would hang out with them, and we would just have ciphers, and I was just like, oh, okay, I'm not good at this yet. Oh, I'm not good at this, but I think it's something I could do too. And so like that was maybe like 10 15 years ago, and so I've just been ever since then just kind of like steadily working at it.
Now you use Big Lux, your musical background, your the art that you've created to really activate, to raise awareness about causes around race and equity issues. How did you get into that? How did you realize that this art form could also be a way to talk about some of these important issues? You actually created this really important video where you integrate from the civil rights struggles in the 1965 period to today, what's been happening over the last year or two. What prompted that? What was the catalyst for that?
Yeah, I mean, and that song is called Red March, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of that I've done. When I knew that I was going to be leaving my real estate job in Miami, one of the first things I did was I hit up my buddy in LA, Phil, who's a great producer. He grew up in Rhode Island with me playing violin, but now he produces for Black Violin, some of these other great big acts. He's done some stuff with Bieber, and so like I was just like, hey man, we need to get together to make this thing happen. And so we wrote this thing together, and it was I was still a reservist. I was still in an Army Reserve unit at the time too, and so I still didn't really feel like I had been able to speak my mind about what I thought about the current administration and the government, because if you're in uniform, that's just something that you can't do. And I felt like I really had to bite my tongue my whole military career, because that's just what we need from our military in all those times. But the Trump administration wore me out. I'm not gonna lie, it wore a lot of us out, and so I was really just felt like I was at the point where I just needed to say something. And so I made one of those songs about all my frustrations that I was feeling about the administration, about the way that they were trying to divide people, about the way that they're trying to treat Black and brown people, immigrants, all of the divisive things that came out. And I'm extremely proud of it. And so that was like 2019 when I wrote the song. And then fast forward a year to after George Floyd was murdered, and I was trying to really figure out a way to respond to that. And I was just racking my brain, and I realized that I had already said like all of the things that I wanted to say already. I just really needed to make it more visible and make it more real to people. And so that was the genesis of the video.
Wow. And I read that John Lewis, the late iconic congressman from Georgia, is a big inspiration for you. Why John Lewis?
John Lewis is he's a titan, and he really inspired me. And one of the reasons why that song is called March is because of the march, principally the march that he led across the Edmund Pettus Bridge for voting rights. And the footage, a lot of the footage that you see in that Red March video is him leading that protest and being met by police with billy clubs. And just like driven back across it in that bloody Sunday. And I can't imagine having to go through the things that he and some of the other civil rights leaders had to go through. I mean, we think it's like contentious now, like when I show up to a school board meeting and people are talking about CRT and like, we have like, 3 or 4 police, and it seems like it's a little bit tense or whatever, but we're talking about full scale beatings, blood, broken bones. Like it was a war. It was the kind of war that we are just like, it's just hard to visualize this day and age until we got to a place where we are protesting. We had all these people in the street for George Floyd, and we saw, what the police were starting to do when they're cracking back on some of those protesters. But he understood the most essential thing about making our democracy work for everyone was that making sure that everyone's voice could be heard no matter what. And we are really in danger of that not being the case.
I know you said, Big Lux, that you heard the conversation I was having with Tracy about her book, Black Joy. What brings you joy? How are you finding joy these days?
I mean, I love this, and I think of the premise of Black Joy, and the first thing that always comes to mind, I think, was a few years ago when I was down in Miami and Black Panther was released in the theaters, and they showed that scene of all these different tribes coming down the river on rafts and dancing and all that celebration, and I realized, I feel like my entire life I had not known exactly what Black Joy was until I saw that scene in the movie. And I feel like there's so many other people who probably felt the same way. And it was just like, oh wow, we feel seen, we feel connected to our culture in a way that we've never felt before, just because like there just hasn't been that kind of media out there for us. And so ever since then, I feel like I've kind of been on a voyage of self-discovery and cultural identity. Like, I was that guy in the family that's buying everybody dashikis and stuff, and they don't know what to do. And they know my brother be gonna like, thanks, bro.
Okay.
but like it's
Big Lux is going through his black phase. Okay, that's nice. Thank you, Big Lux.
Exactly.
I understand, like you said, those 13 years you were in the military, you had to conform to what the military requires. As you said, it's important for order and for our national security that you did that, but now you're free. You get to express yourself. So I'm glad you were buying those daishikis. Support Black businesses, so you're also spreading joy in that way. So that's great.
But then I think the other components of it is just to be present and to be visible and to make sure that I am doing whatever I can to improve my community, to improve conditions for marginalized people, across the spectrum, and that I'm just doing my part, because I just feel like we're living in an age where there's so much abundance and so many people are just so worried about just like keeping their little tiny piece of it, versus trying to understand that, there's enough for everyone. We all, like, it's not a zero-sum game, if Black and brown people like are given the opportunities to succeed that they deserve, we all win, nobody loses. And just like if I can convince like one or two or three or more people of that, which is the work that I'm currently doing with the organization that I co-founded in Westerly, the Westerly Anti-Racism Coalition, trying to educate our town leaders. We've never had a Black elected official in my town, and it's like, in its entire history, and so they've never had to grapple with these issues before. And so just being able to be the one to be like, all right, like, this is, I know we've done things this way for the last 300 years, but there's another perspective too.
Right. Well, thank you for that work, and thank you for this journey that you're on to educate, make folks aware and to uplift the community. And obviously, you're doing that through your music. You have this new album out called Generations. I want to make sure everybody goes, checks it out, finds it, downloads it, buy it, support the work of Big Lux. You're going to bless us, with some of your music. We're so excited to have you on, and not just learn more about your life, which is so fascinating, but also to hear some of your music. So the floor is all yours. This is your moment. Show us what you got, Big Lux.
All right, thank you. Let's do it. So I'm gonna do a song called Tonic. It is off of this Generations EP. It's one of these things that gives me joy too. It's a little bit about the pandemic, but how I found joy in it in my quarantine situation.
All right.
All right, here we go. This world got me feeling so sick. I don't know what they gonna do about this. People hating on each other. Then I need an aspirin for blood flows and my headache. Call the surgeon and the medic. They say I'm hypochondriac, but how could all this be fake? First time I saw you walking, might have sprained my damn neck. See you in them jeans and the long ass legs. Bleach blonde hair on your pretty ass head. Had to take some Motrin, reduce swelling with a quickness. I'ma tell you medicine do nothing for the stiffness. Cause you are the one. Yo, we say influenza, Zika, Ebola, Corona. Girl, I know that you can cure that ish if you wanna. Influenza, Zika, Ebola, Corona. Girl, I know that you can cure that ish if you wanna. Cause girl, you are the tonic. Girl, you are the tonic. Looking for that loving. Yeah, you are the product. Cause you are the one. Say, girl, you are the tonic. Girl, you are the tonic. Looking for some loving. Yeah, you are the product. You are the one. You are the tonic, yeah, you are the tonic. Looking for some loving, yeah, you are the product. You are the one. Yo, damn, I got the sickness, need a little script. Doctor say the magic word, she handed me my wish list. What? No vaccine? That's obscene. Tired of these fake ass girls, hydroxychloroquine. We still quarantine, I guess we in to the wing. It's better than the pills with that small ass print. Better than procedures, it's home medicine. Popping pills with you, getting high as woo. Feeling like I'm in a cloud when I'm in your sheets. Forget it all, deliver Uber Eats for the week. Yeah, she talking dirty, but she moves so sweet. Doctor, if it's good, why I feel so weak? Dick will go to work, Nike will go to sleep. Ritalin the concentrating, Flonase for the breathe. Girl, why you playing? You know you're the one for me. Girl, you are the tonic. Girl, you are the tonic. Looking for some loving. Yeah, you are the product. You are the one. Yeah, I said, girl, you are the tonic. Yeah, you are the tonic. Looking for some loving. Yeah, you are the product. You are the one. We say, why you got me in my feels? The side effect can handle it. Is how you know that is for real. Yo, we say, why you got me in my feels? The side effect can handle it. Is how you know that is for real.
Well, that is amazing. Thank you so much. I'm just loving the lyrics. that you said this, you wrote this during quarantine, obviously, and you threw in everything we're dealing with. You made it obviously something we could all relate to. Thank you so much. Your music is fantastic. Make sure you check out his new album, Generations. Everywhere music is sold. Big Lux. So glad you moved back to Rhode Island, traded in that briefcase for that violin, so you can do that music thing, because you're so talented, and the world needs to hear and see more of you for sure. Best of luck in everything that you do. We'll be following your music and following your career, because it just feels like things are going to blow up for you now that you're back home with your people, doing what you love to do. Again, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wow, what an amazing show this morning. I feel super inspired and encouraged by both of my guests. They are both definitely spreading Black joy. I want to make sure we are supporting these artists. Make sure you pick up Big Lux's new album, Generations. Buy it everywhere albums are sold. Make sure you pick up a copy of Tracy's new book, Black Joy. We want to make sure they feel the love and energy from this special report. Just a few words to live by before I get out. And my words are, in the words of Tracy, Black joy. Experience it, embrace it, and spread it. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Wear your mask, get your booster shot. And remember, we're all in this together.